If you were to kind of take the story before the story, I guess it starts way back when Chris and I were working at another church, and we were tasked with the job of trying to figure out what God was doing on Long Island. Started researching and talking to a lot of folks and trying to get a sense as to what was going on in Nassau County, what God was doing, what the churches were doing, how healthy the larger church was.
Yeah, we did a lot of networking. We called as many churches as we could find. We talked to so many different pastors. And one of the things we really found was that in Long Island, especially Nassau County, all of the good quality churches were on one of the coasts. They were all lined up either across the North Shore or across the South Shore. And there were several, but really in a county of 1.3 million people, just not nearly enough quality churches.
And with that kind of opening in the middle of the county, right, where all of the intersections are and the freeways, I guess what they're calling the hub area, there just weren't a great number of the kinds of churches that we felt would be most effective in reaching Nassau County.
Yeah, and people were surprised to hear that because there are so many church buildings on Long Island. They're everywhere. But as you start to talk about these churches and you start to take a look at what's really happening inside of them, most of them are dormant. Most of them are more like museums or recreational or social societies. There just were not, and still to this day are not, that many solid Christian churches in Nassau County.
I think it was during that time we really fell in love with the idea of church planting. We started researching it and talking to a lot of different people, even some national organizations, just trying to figure out what was happening in other parts of the country, what was happening throughout Long Island and New York, and just trying to figure out what it would look like if a church planting movement even started. And we were getting excited.
We just started meeting for prayer every week. Our two families, we would pray and we would just talk about and dream about, what could happen on Long Island if churches were being planted.
You make the prayer meeting sound a little bit more holy.
It was mostly eat Cheryl's amazing food, then talk a little bit about, talk a lot actually, about what the church could be like. And then at the end, remember to pray for just a few minutes about what God might do. But even still, he honored those prayers.
He really did.
Amazing things started to happen.
And it really was a time where we felt like as we were praying, God was beginning to do things, even things that we hadn't prayed about. But he was beginning to move pieces. And the four of us, me and Cheryl and Chris and Anya, we were really growing in a love for not just the church, but the church here in Long Island. Really growing in our sense that this was a place that God had called us to do a new work.
So during that period, one day, the two of us, we took a drive. We went to a few of the churches kind of in the area where we felt called that something needed to happen. One of the churches in particular, we went there midweek, and as you might expect, it was completely empty midweek. One of the doors was not locked, so we took that as, of course, an open invitation to come inside.
They might have been inside, even though they hadn't answered the door. Maybe they didn't hear us or something like that.
Someone could have needed help. There's really no way to tell. So we went in there, we poked around this church building, and we had, in part of our prayer, of course, we've been asking for direction.
We've been asking for a sign.
Absolutely. Give us a sign. And they had a picture of their own sign from a different day. It said, if you're looking for a sign from God, this is it. And they had posted it on their wall. So we had been asking God for a sign. We went to this church where they had graciously left the door open for us. We went in, and there was our sign from God.
It was a sign from God, and we took it as a sign from God. In those moments, something really did stir in our hearts. We decided it was time that we were going to start a new church. And rooted in prayer and trusting that God would lead, we were going to do this thing. We now had a conviction that God wanted us to start a church. But of course, we didn't know what we were doing. Neither of us had started a church before. We didn't even have many close friends who had done the church planting thing. From there, we just started talking to some people, a couple of our friends, and trying to find out if they were interested in being a part
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there were some people who had been part of previous churches that we had been at, and just other people that we met as a result of relationships. And I think, by the spring of 2005, there were like 11 families or something like that. That's when we incorporated as a church, and that's when Beacon Church began to exist.
We were meeting in a house in New Hyde Park. That was pretty much the only space that we had at the time. I think around that time we started kind of the Beacon office in our basement.
So we did some church visits. We had a team that would go kind of to different churches on Sunday mornings just to get a flavor of what was out there and what our team could learn from and grow from. And then eventually people kept asking, when are your services? So summer 2005, we decided to have preview services. So we did 3 preview services and a couple more prayer meetings over at the Wingate Hotel. Well, our very first service, we had a few adults in this meeting room, and I remember it became time to receive the offering and the connection card. This was our first offering in the history of Beacon Church, and
we were really well prepared for it because I had went out to like a Pier 1 and purchased these very cool, very hip tin offering bucket basket things. I just forgot to tell anyone else that those were the offering baskets. So the coffee team used them to hold sugar.
So we had the offering baskets full of sugar and sweet and low, and it was time to receive the offering. And so Conrad came down the aisle to receive the offering, and there was nothing for him to receive it with. So he just took it in my hand. He just handed it to him, and that's how we received our very first offering, which might have been a little bit off-putting to some people, I'm not sure. But those people had already stayed through children's ministry check-in.
And that showed a certain level of commitment. In order to get to the children's ministries, they had given us an upstairs hotel room. And so you'd have to go down the hall and make a right and then get into the elevators. You'd have to go upstairs, come out of the elevators, down a hallway, make a left, down another little hallway until you got to a hotel room where you would have to leave your kids.
How are we still open?
I have no idea.
So it was during this time that we continued to network and talk with churches in the area where we felt like Beacon Church should be.
And one of the churches that we had met with was right in the middle of the area that we were really excited about trying to start the church. Mm-hmm. And it was right off of the main freeways. It was on some major roads. It was a tiny little church, East Williston Baptist Church.
So we went and we talked to them.
We met a guy there, Dan. He was on their search committee and one of the lay leaders of the church. In our conversations, we were saying, hey, we just want to rent some space, that's all. And Dan, he wasn't willing to let that go. He wanted more than us renting space. We had lunch with him one day and he said, so you guys are a small but growing church with vision and dreams and leadership. And we are an older, established, declining church with a building. Why don't we join forces? Why don't we merge? To which we, of course, said,
oh, we told him that would never work. We told him this, it's not a good idea. Listen, Dan, you guys are not going to like us because you're not going to like our music, it's too loud. You're not going to like our teaching, it's not loud enough. You're not going to like so many other things about the way we dress and who we are. It's never going to work. So listen, if you really want to merge, here's the only way that could ever possibly happen. You would have to completely adopt our constitution, our leaders, our style, our everything. We would graciously receive your building. That would be the merger. Of course, assuming that would completely end this conversation, but it didn't. So then they said, well, why don't you and your team come out and do services here for a couple of months? And after a couple of months of services, we'll see what it's like. And we told them, listen, we'd be happy to come out and do church for you one time. That's it. We're not going to do it anymore. We were really nice back then. We said, listen, you wanted too much. We'll do it once. That's it. Nothing else. They said, okay. So we did. They asked us to come back a second time. We kind of said no. but you and I did it by ourselves. We didn't have the teams or anything. So we went and we actually conducted a more traditional service that day. I played some hymns on the piano and Robert sort of delivered a regular sermon. We both
and we busted out the blazers.
Yeah, we did. We put on our blazers, which is probably still the only one that I have. And after we had this service with them on October 2nd, we stayed afterwards for just a little meeting, and they had a few questions. And I remember there was one kind of younger guy in the back. He was vocally against this idea of merging, and he didn't want anything to do with it. And then down front, sitting on our left, was this old guy, the oldest man in the room. His name was Ken, and Ken started to stand up. And everyone was quiet because clearly Ken wanted to say something. And Ken had been at the East Williston Baptist Church forever, for decades. He had really been the glue to hold it together. So he stood up, and it was very hard for him, but he got up on the pew, and he had one hand here, and he raised his fist, and he said to the crowd, "We must do this. This is the future of our church."
We were blown away.
We couldn't believe it.
We
just couldn't believe it, this old guy.
Ends up, he was a real opinion leader. Mm-hmm. He had a great deal of respect in the congregation. And so the East Williston Baptist Church, they decided to call for a vote as to whether or not they would, as to whether or not they wanted to merge with this little upstart Beacon Church.
So we still didn't really know where any of this was leading. So we had already a plan in place for our own fall launch, October 9th.
We had to get out of the Wingate,
mm-hmm.
and so we had already secured space at the Holiday Inn, mm-hmm. right over on Old Country Road.
Mm-hmm. We had a contract in place with them to start weekly services October 9th. We had enough resources raised to commit to those services from October through December. And that was it. That was all we had. We had enough money for like 10 church services.
We were launching with a very cool series, we thought.
And we were going to give out invitations along with Oreo cookies.
We had like 5,000 of these postcards mm-hmm. with 5,000 mm-hmm. packs of Oreo cookies.
Yeah, so we all left that October 2nd meeting at East Williston Baptist Church. We were driving to Eisenhower Park, and Dan Carrazzo called us. You talked to them for just a minute, then you got off the phone, you said, "It's done. They voted to merge with us."
So then we pull into the parking lot over at Eisenhower Park. Our whole team is ready. They're with their coolers filled with cookies, and they got their cards, and they're ready. They're excited to go and advertise the launch of Beacon Church.
The team was all in their own cars. We all get there, and they all get out, and then we announced to them that we've actually merged with East Williston Baptist Church, and we're not going to launch next week, and we're not going to give out these cookies, and we're not going to give out these cards. The next week, we all showed up at East Williston Baptist Church and started having church together. That was October 9th, 2005. And then there was an interim minister who had been there at the time, kind of helping them on Sunday morning, so that was going to be his last day. So afterwards, we all went downstairs for a quick little lunch just to thank him for his time at the church. And then at the end of that lunch, Robert decided to make an announcement.
I had told everyone that if they had donated some of these hymnals in honor of someone that they loved, that they could go upstairs after the party and collect those hymnals and take them home. And of course they asked, "So why would we take the hymnals?" And so we said, "Well, there won't be a place to put them next week." And one person in the back says, "What do you mean there won't be a place to put them? We keep them in the back of the pews." And we said, "Oh, because the pews are leaving this week. We gave them away to another church."
Yeah, so one lady burst into tears right away.
Started crying, gasps.
It was quiet in the room, and then Conrad says, just a little bit too loud, "Oh boy." So then from there, we all went outside, and the East Williston Baptist Church had a beautiful kind of, wooden sign with the inlaid, gold leaf lettering like a lot of churches use. So we went out there, and we had made this nice, really classy corrugated plastic sign that was like blue with white letters, I think, that said, "Beacon Church, grand opening," like we were a car lot or something. "Beacon Church, grand opening." So we went right out front with a screw gun and just like zip, 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 zipped it right into the front of their beautiful sign. We were like, yay! That's our sign. So then from there, we hit the ground running. We went into a whirlwind renovation of this building. A lot of cleanup and,
We ripped out the carpets. We had to rebuild some of the spaces. Every surface needed attention.
Anything like sound system or projection or lighting didn't really exist. And we had teams of people there day and night for several weeks. So on December 4th, 2005, that building was ready for worship, and that's when we launched.
It is a delight to be launching Beacon Church this morning, and we're very, very glad that all of you have decided to be a part of that.
So we had really given ourselves to this project, just as much as we could. Then the morning of the launch, we woke up, it was snowing. There was a couple inches on the ground already, a couple more inches to come, and we thought, it's a new church in a new location, no one was going to come.
And the snow just made it feel like God didn't like us.
But they did. We had 195 people come to that very first launch on that first Sunday. Then we started having church every week. We really kind of think of that day as our birthday, really, as when we started public weekly services in that location. We really did our first major outreach series that next spring. And we advertised this series, we had some special events surrounding it, and the church really grew. It's one of our strongest growth seasons. By the end of 2006, we were already having 2 services on Sunday mornings.
We were really excited in those days because God was clearly doing something. The church was growing, and there was a great deal of excitement and very high buy-in from the volunteer base. It was a really exciting time, and we really felt like this was our trajectory, that we were going to work this plan that God had given to us, and in this building, in that location, and we were real excited about it.
Beacon kept and still has to this day, just that warm family feeling of everyone, whether it's your very first week or whether you were at the Wingate Hotel in 2005. Every person is welcome and every person is valuable, and that culture, it really grew in that time.
We were really in a place where we felt like we were doing exactly what we had set out to do and what we felt God had called us to do. From the very beginning, we had church planting put in our hearts. Mm-hmm. That was a big part of why we had started Beacon. We felt like the area needed more churches to make a difference in all of the various neighborhoods. And so we had heard from a woman in our church that there was another church over in New Hyde Park that was struggling. So we made it a point to go talk to them and to say, hey, we just helped turn around this church in East Williston. In any way that we can, let us help you turn your church around.
We immediately stepped in and started running their Sunday morning service for them.
It was an amazing opportunity. We said we wanted to help. Now they needed someone to help them on Sunday mornings, and we were determined to figure out a way to make that happen. We were doing 2 services at East Williston at the time, and so we decided to squeeze a 3rd service, which was sort of interesting because we would start the East Williston service, and then you'd have to head over early, and I was still teaching at East Williston, but you were starting the worship service, and then when you were leaving the worship service at New Hyde Park, I was coming in to teach.
Yeah, exactly.
And we did it again.
Mm-hmm. The sound team in the back would have to kind of give me a wave when Robert got back from New Hyde Park, and sometimes he wasn't there, so we'd have special videos and medias kind of queued up, ready to go in case we needed them. So that was what we did.
Yep.
Really became clear to all of us that joining forces was a good idea.
I remember when we were talking to the congregation about the New Hyde Park campus and the initiative. The conversation was, what are we doing? How can we do this? It's too big a project for Beacon to take on. And then a consensus arose among all the people, and a consensus that said, lost people matter. There are people who need to find hope. And if being in New Hyde Park helps us reach more people with the gospel, then we should do it, no matter what.
By December of 2007, these 2 churches had finished merging into one new United Beacon Church. So in the winter and early 2009, we started to remodel that facility.
This building needed the infrastructure, every surface. It was a bigger building. It was in worse shape. It was a massive, massive undertaking.
And there were so many people who were a part of that. The people of the church coming together and rebuilding it for ministry. So then that was ready, and we launched on Palm Sunday, 2009. with a full-scale second campus ready to go. And that was a great day. That was a real high water mark in our history. And the church just continued to grow.
So then what we ended up with was one church in 2 locations, able to continue to reach even deeper into these 2 communities. And so our early dreams of seeing more churches started in more areas throughout Long Island, it was starting to happen right before our eyes.
Just seeing that more and more people in the community are excited to come out and just begin to learn about God's Word. The teams really grew. We've seen new people come onto the staff. We've seen key volunteers step up and serve in new and more significant ways.
The Beacon team was gelling and coming together, and
the close-knit family feel of Beacon still continued, but yet the ministry and the mission grew.
Seeing this love for our communities really grow from the very beginning, when it was just the 4 of us, when it was me and Cheryl and you and Anya praying. So many of our prayers at that time were focused on helping people who are far from God find hope in the message of the gospel and in Jesus Christ. It's been rooted in who we are, a part of our DNA, and now an increasing number of people know that lost people matter to God.
It's a very special thing when a church comes together as a plant, beginning with only a few people. There's an understanding from the very beginning that every single person matters, and that if you are not using your gifts and your abilities in serving God through the local church, there's going to be a void left behind because you haven't filled it. Even though Beacon now has grown, there's more people attending than we've ever seen before, there's still that value in our congregation. God has made it clear to us that He is not finished with Beacon, and I believe that even greater things are still ahead of us.